Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, chips, ships, and drones. How are the tools shaping Beijing's arsenal of autocracy, posing risks to the U.S.? A look at a House panel's latest findings on China's bid to dominate crucial industries.
It's a criminal state, is what it is.
Every economic activity accrues to the party's benefit, and the party's goal is to upend our way of life and to dominate and change our way of life.
U.S. Ambassador to China Nicholas Burns delivering a slew of rebukes against Beijing. Hear his take on how China's actions are affecting U.S. relations, as well as Beijing's support for Russia amid the war in Ukraine. Taiwan's Coast Guard reporting 4 Chinese Coast Guard vessels entering Taipei-controlled waters, but the Chinese boats found themselves quickly chased away. And the U.S. Justice Department slapping a $14.5 million fine to a Chinese oil and gas company subsidiary. More details on the allegations that it broke American export laws. The China threat in the spotlight on Capitol Hill. 2 House committees dive into the regime's efforts to subvert America economically and politically, with the ultimate goal to, quote, change our way of life. Here's more.
It's a criminal state, is what it is.
Every economic activity accrues to the party's benefit, and the party's goal is to upend our way of life and to dominate and change our way of life. I believe that these listing standards should be changed.
In a nutshell, this is what U.S. lawmakers are working to expose to the American people. Congress on Wednesday held 2 separate hearings to probe the Chinese Communist Party's global subversion, and witnesses say that the threats that China poses run deep in the business sector and beyond.
You can attack the United States diplomatically through science and culture and education, science and technology, data, space, trade, and it's all interconnected.
Congressman Michael Cloud tells NTD that China is taking advantage of our own policies to engage in unrestricted warfare.
You can think about the border, for example, just as one, how not only are they working to get fentanyl through, they're working to get a number of potentially their military into our country through the border apparatus they've set up.
As for militarily, China now dominates the shipbuilding industry, and its Navy has doubled in size, now far surpassing the U.S. Navy.
The gap between our number of ships and theirs is widening dramatically.
Congresswoman Ashley Hinson tells NTD that China's so-called green energy initiatives are counterproductive. But at the same time, America needs to close policy loopholes to allow manufacturers at home to thrive.
They are not truly embracing green technology if they're manufacturing all these things using dirty coal and dirty oil and slave labor, right? How China continually goes around all of the mechanisms we put in place to protect American manufacturing. And so that's where I think we need to do some more work.
The China issue is a bipartisan one. One witness stressing the importance of maintaining a united front in opposing the CCP because it aims to divide and conquer.
But it's essential to remember what China is trying to accomplish, the ends as well as the means, which are to amplify our divisions and to create political paralysis so that we squander our strengths so that our government cannot act to meet our challenges.
The lawmakers acknowledge the work done under both the Trump and Biden administrations with trade tariffs and otherwise, but they warned that the efforts still fall short and more work does need to be done in order to counter the CCP's efforts to subvert American values. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
A rare series of rebukes against Beijing coming from a top Washington official. U.S. Ambassador to China Nicholas Burns criticized China on Wednesday for providing aid to Russia in the Ukraine war. Here's what he said during a speech in Shanghai.
And our critique of China, of the People's Republic of China, is that it is not neutral, but has effectively sided with Russia in this war. We think it's a major mistake to allow Chinese companies by the thousands to be sending so many components, technology components, microprocessors, nitrocellulose, to Russia to reinforce and strengthen the defense industrial base of the Russian Federation for this brutal war.
Burns said the China relationship in the Ukraine war is central to the U.S. and cannot be ignored when discussing U.S.-China relations. Washington's top diplomat to China is offering up more critique than usual. In a Tuesday interview with the Wall Street Journal, Burns said the regime is undermining ties with America. He added that despite promises to boost engagement from both sides, China is taking steps to make diplomacy impossible, from fueling anti-American sentiment to preventing citizens from attending U.S. organized events. On top of that, the diplomat said Beijing is making it harder for Chinese students to study abroad. Many of them have been pressured by authorities, schools, and employers to pull out of U.S.-funded exchange programs. What's more, Burns brought up a recent incident in northeast China where a Chinese man stabbed 4 college instructors from the state of Iowa. He said the communist regime has been evasive about the motives of the perpetrator. Last year, the U.S. issued more than 100,000 student visas to Chinese citizens. That marks the highest number since the COVID-19 pandemic. The approval rate has become even faster in 2024. China's foreign ministry rejected Burns' comments on Wednesday, describing them as far-fetched. A $14.5 million fine for U.S. export law violations. The Justice Department on Tuesday said PetroChina's unit International America has agreed to pay the fine for mislabeling a cargo of diesel that was exported to Mexico. Here's what the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Texas said in a press release. The company, quote, misclassified more than $32 million of ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel as mineral oil mix, adding that it was done for certain export transactions to Mexico that took place in 2019 and 2020. In a nutshell, authorities found evidence that the company reported inaccurate information when declaring exports from the U.S. The statement added that the company has fully cooperated with the investigation into the violations and has enhanced its compliance program. Killed for their beliefs. That's the tragic fate for many prisoners of conscience in several countries around the globe. Secretary of State Antony Blinken just released this year's annual human rights report. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more from the State Department.
This report analyzes religious freedom in nearly 200 countries across the globe. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, when announcing this report on Wednesday, spoke to a group of persecuted individuals from across the globe. One of them is a practitioner of Falun Gong, a spiritual practice based on truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, and consists of meditative exercises.
This year marks the 25th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party's crackdown on Falun Gong practitioners. Joining us today is Hua Sheng, a courageous leader who has served several prison sentences, at times enduring torture for her beliefs, and who eagerly seeks to be reunited with her husband, who is still imprisoned in China.
I was arrested. They sentenced me to the jail for 4 years and sentenced me to the labor camp for 3 years and 6 months. They forced me to give up. For example, they didn't allow me to go to bed, and not allow me to sit down even.
As for her husband, who's currently in prison for practicing Falun Dafa,
I every day worry about his safety.
This comes a day after the House passed a bipartisan bill called the Falun Gong Protection Act, which would sanction any individual involved in the Chinese regime's forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners. And earlier this week, the State Department released the 2024 Trafficking in Persons report, which also cited concerns over China's forced organ harvesting.
For Falun Gong practitioners in China, is like a light. It's very, very helpful for them. Although CCP said that they don't care, as if they don't care about the U.S. government action or something, but indeed they are afraid. So I think U.S. government can do more, because the persecution lasts too long, 25 years.
This report will be used to influence policy decisions in the government going forward. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
During the Second World War, America was called the arsenal of democracy. Now, the House Select Committee on China's new chairman is dubbing the Chinese Communist Party an arsenal of autocracy. Human Rights Watch says Beijing renamed hundreds of Xinjiang villages to erase Uyghur Muslim culture. Recent reports reveal even words like sultan and shrine are vanishing from place names in China's Xinjiang region, replaced by words like harmony and happiness. General Robert Spalding, retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General and author of War Without Rules, joined us to discuss. General Spalding, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thanks. Great to be back.
Now, why does the Chinese regime go after religion in the country? What is it afraid of?
Because they do not want the people of China to look to any other authority than the Chinese Communist Party. You know, here in the United States, we have religion, which is separate from the state, and that's codified into our U.S. Constitution. Within China, religion is not allowed, particularly as it may come into conflict with people's, focus on the Chinese Communist Party. In other words, there can be no God other than the Chinese Communist Party. There can be no other religion other than the Chinese Communist Party. It is like it wants to be, and it forces itself to be the religion of China. One of the things that happened with the Falun Gong is they saw that as a spiritual organization that threatened the ruling party, the Communist Party, and therefore they sought to crush those people. They do the same thing with the Christians, the Muslims, everybody. As long as that religion says that the ultimate authority is not really God, but the Chinese Communist Party, then the Communist Party is okay with it.
On that note, in your first book, Stealth War, you mentioned how here in the West we have rule by law, but in China it's more rule by fear. Given that, how can we start to understand why or how the Chinese regime does certain things?
Well, so it's actually rule of law versus rule by law. And so, America is a rule of law country. It set up an international order that was based on the rule of law. In China, rule by law means that, it's in a sense lawfare against the population. So the Chinese Communist Party will figure out whatever the punishment and whatever the conviction is for the crime, and then they will give that decision to the court. So even though they have courts and they have, show trials and everything else, the decision of the court has already been made by the Chinese Communist Party. So what that means is they use the legal system as a way to control the population. In other words, if the Chinese Communist Party wants to disappear you, throw you in jail, have you executed, they can do that, and they just hand the decision to the judicial system. So there's no independent judicial system that monitors other organizations in the country. It is the Chinese Communist Party is the judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to China and law.
General Spalding, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Next, a social media account linked to China's state-run CCTV posted a video Wednesday. The clip appeared to show a U.S. military aircraft dropping unidentified items into the South China Sea. The account said the Chinese Coast Guard reportedly salvaged and checked one of the items. The post claims the item is a submarine probe that can be used to detect or counter Chinese submarine signals, adding the item is from an American company called Ultra Maritime. NTD reached out to the Pentagon, the U.S. Navy, and Ultra Maritime for comments, but did not hear back before airtime. Another update at sea. The Taiwanese Coast Guard said Tuesday that 4 Chinese Coast Guard vessels entered restricted waters off the Taiwanese islands of Kinmen, but a spokesperson said Taiwan's ships chased the Chinese boats away as soon as possible. The Kinmen Islands have always been ruled by Taiwan. Although China claims Taiwan is part of its territory, the Chinese regime has never governed Taiwan or Kinmen. Taipei rejects China's sovereignty claims. After the Tuesday incident, the island's Coast Guard criticized Beijing, calling the move interference in the Indo-Pacific. According to Taiwan's official data, since January of this year, the island has expelled a total of 835 Chinese vessels after they entered Taiwan-controlled waters. Taiwanese troops boarded 7 of them for inspection. China regularly sends Coast Guard patrols around the Kinmen Islands, which Taiwan describes as improper law enforcement. A Chinese carrier rocket is expected to pass through Taiwan's airspace. That's according to a notice put out by the island's defense ministry. The report says the aircraft will be launched from China's Shanxi province on Wednesday and is set to make its way east towards the Philippine Sea. As of 6 a.m. Tuesday, the island reported 17 Chinese aircrafts and 8 vessels patrolling around the Taiwan Strait. Among them, 10 aircraft reportedly crossed the median line, an unofficial barrier between the two sides. For decades, the Chinese Communist Party has seen Taiwan as part of its own territory and has vowed to take it by force if necessary. That's despite never having ruled it. Warren Buffett's investing giant Berkshire Hathaway has sped its sell-off of shares in China's top electric car maker. According to a filing with the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, Berkshire has reduced its stake in BYD to just under 6% as of last week. About a week before that, its stake was closer to 7%. The firm is close to the threshold where it will no longer have to disclose its share sales. Berkshire Hathaway started investing in China's largest electric vehicle seller in 2008. At the time, it owned a 10% stake. The Buffett-backed company started disclosing sales of shares about 2 years ago. That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 3 years. If you'd like to support us, consider donating. Find us at donorbox.org/China-in-focus or subscribe to our partner platform Epic TV, where you can watch our full episodes. Just click the link down below. Here's what to look out for in our second half. A fast fashion giant from China soon offering up more than $5 clothing. Online shopping platform Shein is gearing up for a quiet IPO in London, but its affordable fashion could be at risk under a new EU regulation. Is Shein's potential British IPO a badge of shame for the London Stock Exchange? The human rights organization is raising concerns over the Chinese firm's labor and human rights practices. And Olympic gold medalists Michael Phelps and Alison Smith decried doping during House testimony as previously accused Chinese swimmers prepare for the Summer Games in Paris. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.